Elsie, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. And I appreciate your acknowledgements of the ceded, unceded land, because that's my history as well. My parents are Russian Mennonite immigrants and also lost their land in the early 1900s to the government. So I always appreciate that acknowledgement. When I asked Michelle, and thank you, Michelle, for hosting this and for organizing it all. I really appreciate it. In this time of COVID, there are no book launches as we writers know them, but this is a great way to celebrate this book's appearance. So when I asked Michelle, what should I focus on? She said, focus a lot on the history of New Westminster. So I dug back into my own story and had two very vivid memories of New Westminster. The first being in the 1960s, when as a first generation Canadian, my family piled into the car and drove from Abbotsford to New Westminster to shop at Army and Navy. School books and school clothes must have been a lot less expensive than shopping in Abbotsford. And so I remember so well walking up the steel steps where the parkade was and the railroad tracks underneath, and then going into the store. And it was kind of like Sin City because we were quite remote in then Abbotsford. The other memory I have is in 1977, going shopping for a wedding dress, and New Westminster was the place to buy a wedding dress. I went with my mother, who at that time didn't speak English very well, and I was always embarrassed when she did that. She'd speak Low German to me in public. Well, there she was. I was trying on this dress, and she started speaking to me in Low German, and the salesperson responded in Low German to my horror. And so those are two memories I have of New Westminster. And by the way, the salesperson was from Manitoba, and my cousin Peter is here from Manitoba. So there you go, Peter, from your country. So what to talk about when you have a book that's over 400 pages long? And how the heck did a Mennonite from Abbotsford who moved to English Bay hook up with Mott Electric? I can't say that I knew any electricians till I met Dan Mott. I was a friend of a mutual friend who introduced me, and long before I met Dan, I heard about big stories about Danny Mott. And so there he was in all his splendor at an event and asked me what I did. And I said, I'm a writer. Well, what do you write? Oh, I help people write their life stories. And he was immediately excited and always had wanted to do that himself. And since I've heard that line from a lot of other people, I didn't actually believe anything would come of it. But that was in May of 2017. And by July, we had actually met in his office downtown, and I brought a few books that I'd worked on, and he looked them over and started telling me stories about his family and the business. And I took a few notes, and within about 45 minutes, we decided that we would start, and that's how it started. So where do you begin? I've never done a corporate history, so Dan's wish was to record the stories of some of the older employees, many of whom had passed away and were all characters. And so he gave me a few names, and those names mushroomed and became eventually up to 50 people that I interviewed. So that became the backbone of the story. So where did Mott Electric begin? William Malcom Mott was born in 1894 in Halifax. Quite a poor family. They took in boarders to make a living. He quit school at the age of 10, I believe, approximately the age of 10, and returned back after a few years of working, but had a clash with his instructor, and she said, either you leave or I leave. So William walked out, and that was the end of his formal education. He was approximately 15 or so when he went to Sable Island and became part of a life-saving crew there, which meant when boats passing by hit the rocks, he and his fellow workers would jump into a rowboat and save people who had fallen off the ship. Once he himself had to be rescued, and those were very treacherous times, so treacherous that he said in later years that Sable Island was more treacherous than being in the trenches during World War I. So you can imagine what he experienced as a teenager. Well, World War I began, and William, with his mother's signature, his father is quite absent from the story, and this information was gleaned online from Ancestry.com. I don't think the Motts even knew these stories. So off he went overseas, and unbeknownst to the family, except for Dan, who was harboring a very precious item in his desk drawer, William Mott began keeping a diary. And so when I was looking for research material, what I found it in Dan Mott's desk. And when I had read the article about him saying that he was more at risk for death on Sable Island than during World War II, I was quite astounded because he fought at Vimy Ridge. So harrowing stories, and those stories gave me kind of a backdrop and a context for who William Mott was. Quite the survivor. So when he returned from overseas, he began taking technical school, studying to become an electrician, and worked for a while at the oil refinery, but then decided to go to California. A lot of Canadians at that time were heading to the States for work. So off he went. 1922, he and his wife Muriel and their one-year-old son, Jack. They stayed there for almost 5 years when he discovered that if he were not to return to Canada, he would lose his Canadian citizenship. So he hurried back to Canada, but not to the East Coast, this time to Vancouver. And how he ended up in Westminster is a bit of a riddle. There's a lot of questions around the history of how things went at that time, but he did. And it was a very different Westminster than now. Westminster was actually thriving back then. The ports were being built, and Vancouver itself was still being developed. And I believe it was around that same time, 1929, 1930, that Canada actually declared that women were persons. So all of these things were going on back then. And William had only one son at the time, Jack, and in 1931, Don was born. So now we had two sons, but Jack, being the oldest, was sort of the heir apparent. As soon as they settled in Westminster, William and Muriel both became very involved in the community. You name the club, he joined it. He was very civic-minded. Hockey was huge. Over the course of time, Mott Electric ended up sponsoring a lot of hockey teams, lacrosse, basketball, even a bowling team for a while. So they became known in the community. He was also very involved in the local Baptist church, as was Muriel. And so one wonders, just looking at the list of his involvements, how he could have formed this company. In addition to that, he joined the political arena and became first the alderman and then the mayor of Westminster at the end of the 40s, and then actually became the MP for Westminster. So a lot of busyness and not much happening at home. In terms of his being present at home, it simply wasn't possible. So around this time, a tragedy occurred. World War II ended. His son Jack returned, um, and shortly there, and Jack was also training to become an electrician. And soon thereafter, soon after he returned home from World War II, he had a terrible hunting accident and died. So now it was up to Don, who was in his teens, to step up to the plate. Don was around 16 and sowing his oats, so to speak, as well. William had a reputation for wildness in his youth, and Don followed in his father's footsteps quite readily. One story that was told, typical teenage antics. He and his buddies went over to the not the penitentiary, Woodlands, a home for the infirm, and they would go into the attic and play around there. And one night they found a prosthetic leg, and they took it. And Don put it in the back of his trunk with just the foot hanging out, and drove through Westminster and was arrested and spent the night in jail. Now, by this time, Don had started his apprenticeship as well. And the story went that whenever Don came to work so early in order to read the newspapers, in case there were any reports about his previous night's shenanigans, that being just one. So there was a lot of humor and fun among the ranks even then. Now, William, being an MP, was away a lot. And it happened that Don also had a very close encounter with death. He had first a very sort of mediocre accident, and then not long after had another near fatal car accident. So the mood in the Mott family, they lost one son and now had almost lost another. These stories came to me through Bruce Lewis, who began his apprenticeship with Mott Electric in August 1949, the same day that Don Mott started his. Now, Bruce just turned 90 and is very sharp and provided so many wonderful anecdotes about what was happening with Mott in those days. First of all, not long after Don Mott, the second Mott family member, was doing his apprenticeship, he had polio and again almost died. So this family and this business have a pattern of near death experiences, and the cat with 9 lives is an apt cliche that applies to the family and the business as well. So Don survived polio. He was married at the time with a young son named Danny. So that was 1954. And Don Mott was appointed the vice presidency at the age of 30 in 1961, in May of 1961. And sadly, William Mott died in November of 1961. So now it was Don at the helm. He was the only son. Now, how could one person run a family business? Bruce Lewis gave a lot of insights around that story. A number of the employees, long-term employees, were very faithful employees and really carried the company. And Bruce, when I interviewed him, said, Elsie, put this in big letters. The reason Mott Electric exists today is because of Frank Howarth. Frank Howarth was one of 2 electricians that started with the company way back when in the 30s, when they were both still apprentices, and rose through the ranks to become first the supervisor and then the general manager. First was Fred Best, who happened to be the brother-in-law of Frank Howarth. And when Fred Best had a breakdown and could no longer fulfill his duties, Frank was positioned as the next general manager. So I'm going to just read you a little bit about about Fred Best and Frank. So, and these are stories from Bruce Lewis. Now, let me see. Okay. So, Bruce is telling stories. He pauses. Now put that in great big letters, he says, because Frank Howarth's the reason Mott is successful today. And he had a lot of influence on me. Frank never wanted any praise, and he had the greatest sense of humor. The top story for all the years had to do with mission poultry. Some of us guys came into the yard after working somewhere to get our cars and go home. Cliff Lees, myself, Bill Weber, Don Wilson. Frank Howarth came out. We have an emergency. I just got a call from Mission Poultry. They have a power failure. Frank told one person to load up a big generator, another to run to the marine station to get diesel for the generator, and another to go to a restaurant for food. 2 trucks were loaded up with cable and switchgear and other necessary items. But what was the destination? Frank said he'd get an address. Typical Frank. He was grinning from ear to ear. It was 302 10th Street, New Westminster. It was a small packing plant. I put in a 15-amp fuse, and that was it. We're losing chickens by the hour, is what the owner had told Frank, and he'd heard we're losing thousands of birds and blew it out of proportion. And we all thought we were headed to Mission, BC to a farm. Other bosses would have been upset, but he thought it the funniest. There were lots of humorous times, that's for sure. Lots of tough times too, but lots of good times. Bruce laughs at another memory. To show you the kind of guy Frank was, we were close to finishing a job on a substation that had a penalty clause if we missed the deadline. It was like $1,000 a day, and this would have been in the early 60s. We had to bring in a huge transformer from England, which arrived 3 days before the deadline. It got tied down onto a truck by an apprentice, and when he was driving, the truck caught the shoulder, and the transformer went over to the road and smashed one of the insulators, smashed it to hell. I was sort of in charge of the job and thought, I guess I gotta go tell Frank. We got a wrecker with a crane from a garage out there and loaded it up on the truck as best we could. And of course, this is a sick-looking transformer. I went into Frank's office and said, you're not gonna believe this, but we rolled that transformer. What transformer? The one we took out to Essendale today. Oh, that one. Yeah. God damn, he says. Some days it's hard to make $1. We eventually got the breaker fixed, and Frank was able to talk us out of the penalty. He was, anytime there was a crisis, he was there. He really was. He was a great guy. That always remained in my mind when I wished I could have had that response. And I didn't always. Sometimes I blew it and said the wrong things. But Frank seemed to be able to say, damn, it's hard to make $1. And of course, in those days, Bill Mott was still around and he didn't spare any words. And I'm sure Frank caught whatever from Bill. So that takes me to Bruce Lewis, who's just the dearest, finest man who told me so many stories. And Bruce, as I said, started his apprenticeship with Don Mott in 1949. And when Frank Howarth was diagnosed with a brain tumor in the mid-60s, it was Bruce Lewis that he identified to Don as the person who should take his place if he wouldn't make it. And he didn't. And so in 1967, Bruce was asked to come into the office. He happened to be working out at the Matsqui Penitentiary at the time. And Don paid him a visit out there and invited him to come into the office, and Bruce accepted. So I'm going to just take a little segue here and talk about the power of stories. and what happens when a book like this comes out. So I wanted so much to find Frank Howarth's family, to tell them that Frank was in this book. And I was kind of a one-person endeavor with this book and didn't get to it. And no one I talked to seemed to know what had happened to them. And so the book came out, and a note went up on the new Westminster Museum website about this presentation today. And I happened to read the Facebook page, and there I saw the name of Ron Howarth, son of Frank Howarth. And so I located him in Merritt. And we had the loveliest, longest telephone conversation a couple of weeks ago. And Frank told me another story that so captures the spirit of the Mott family. When Frank Howarth died, he was in the position of being general manager. He'd worked for Mott for many, many years, was a very loyal worker. And after he died, it was discovered that he didn't have a lot of savings in the bank. So Don Mott, who was president at the time, visited the home and told Violet, Frank's wife, not to worry, that he would continue paying Frank's wage. And so every month, Ron Howarth would see Don Mott show up at the door with a check for Violet. He thinks for the next year. So books like this are magic. They bring back to life people who are no longer with us. To be able to speak with both of Frank's children, Marion and Ron, and to hear from them what it means for them to have their father acknowledged in a book such as this, without their having known the very significant role he played in the company's success at various junctures. So you just never know what a book like this, where it's going to lead. It really is just magic. So does anyone have any questions to this point? I think I'm finally sort of calming myself. I should have had a glass of wine before I came on. Anyone have any questions? I'll let Michelle look after how to bring you into the picture if anyone does.
I have a question. You had mentioned at the beginning, you made the link of the comment about the unceded lands and how it related to your own life. I was wondering, as you've spent the last several years on this, giving your heart, soul, time, everything to this story, is there a particular or a few, any resonances in your own story? Well, that's a really big question, isn't it? I'm sorry.
Melody. Yeah, that is a big question.
You can ignore that.
No, actually, I have an answer for that question. 6 degrees of separation from the get-go. And one of the stories that I'm going to tell is about one of the staff in the administration. And her name is Kat Falk. So Melody, you're of my people, so you know the name Falk. So were there intersections with my Mennonite history and Mott Electric? Yes, I found Kat Falk, who became one of the few women in the industry to be the chief project manager and estimator. So hooray, and she's of the Mennonite. Henry Siemens also actually has the name of my grandfather. Henry was instrumental in starting the service department in downtown Vancouver, so also rose through the ranks. And I met a few other people and because I still recognize the ethnic Mennonite names, right? And another person that I was going to talk about is Grace Cow, and she was the first estimator, project manager, was not an electrician. She went through BCIT and came through the ranks. her story was parallel to mine in that her parents left China in order to spare their children from being sent into the countryside because they had 3 children. They did not want to give up one of their children. Now, how parallel is that to the Mennonite story, this, you know, the refugee story and so forth. So there were those overlaps. And then one very significant person in the story is Dr. Harder, who was actually the person who diagnosed Don Mott's polio. He was a young doctor, and the diagnosis was missed initially. And so was Dr. Harder, who diagnosed him, and they became very good family friends. So yeah, 6 degrees of separation, and that's how it goes. Thanks for asking, Melody.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I should just add to that. I spent quite a bit of time making notes for this, and then I decided, oh, forget it, just wing it. But a quote that I wanted to use was, the story of any one of us is the story in some measure of us all. So while I was introduced to the world of electricians, you know, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. So those intersections occurred often. Yeah, for sure.
Well, my nephew just moved into a building on Homer that Mott was affiliated with. I think they did the work there, and I don't know. I'm almost finished the book, as I said, and it's. I mean, it just struck me who's really the glue in this country. It's not up there; it's the working people.
That's a very good point, Bob. And Graham Trafford, who only recently resigned as the general manager, spoke with me and about the line of, oh, what's it called? I'm not a business person. I can make a poem about it, but the line of responsibility, and he flips it around so that it's not top down, it's horizontal. And I think that has contributed to the longevity of Mott Electric. There's the Mott family, and then there's the Mott Electric family, and it's really it's a stunning company. It's unique, and I think the book should be everywhere. It's you know, what company tells their story through its staff and employees? Few. You know, it's about profit margins and so forth. And the deeper I dug, I was just astonished perpetually by so many. And there are very few landmarks in this province that have not felt the fingerprint of Mott Electric. Someone just commented, anyone who has lived in Westminster knows of Mott Electric. Yeah, that's so true. Absolutely. Once you see them, I hadn't heard of them, but once you see a Mott truck, you will never be able to not see the Mott trucks. They're everywhere. Yeah. Patricia Penner raised a hand. You'll have to unmute, I think.
Yeah.
Patty.
Hi, Elsie.
Hi, Patty.
I'm wondering, because we work in organizations, and I'm wondering, there's a lot of talk about organizational culture, and I'm wondering if the culture of Mott changed over the decades that it's been going, because, you know, it is one of the strongest things that we say about the organizations we work for. So I'm wondering if you discovered any of that kind of change.
Dan, are you there? Do you want to answer that question? I guess he might have lost a connection. He's out in Merritt.
There we go. You got me now?
Are you there? Yeah, Dan, do you want to
Yep,
answer that question? Do you think the culture has changed from when your grandfather started the company?
There's probably some shift, you know, some due in part to just the changing philosophies of time, of decades, and almost a century. But I'd like to think that the how I was brought up with caring, and that part of our world and culture has been maintained, because that would get passed on generation to generation in the way that you behave, which I can guarantee you all the Motts didn't always behave in the most exemplary of fashions, but I think our hearts were probably in the right place at the end of the day. And something that I was taught by the other side of the family from my mother's side was never have to cross the road. So however you treat people, never have to avoid them. So, I mean, you can be tough, you can be hard, but if you're ruthless or unfair, you can't maybe face that person again. So that was kind of one of the pieces that has stuck with certainly myself, my brothers, and through to Derek and Alicia as well. I'd like to think we behave the best we can, but you can't be good all the time. You just try and do your best. Hopefully that answers in somewhat your questions.
Mm-hmm. And for sure, it was consistently said by all the people I interviewed that it's a family-like culture. But of course, the larger it grows, it's a little bit further away from the center. But to give you an example of that, Patty, one of the people I interviewed was Jeff Lewis, and Jeff was the son of Bruce Lewis. And he talked about a fellow named Fred Jones, who was an electrician and who mentored Jeff. And at a certain point, Fred Jones became a little bit limited with his physical capacities due to a muscular degenerative illness, but Jeff kept him on and found work for him to do. And when I asked Jeff, did somebody tell you to do that? He said, no, that was modeled to us. That's how it goes at Mott Electric. And that it just came through so strongly and so consistently that Mott cares for its people and that everyone matters, no matter what your job. If you're the receptionist or you're the general manager, what you contribute is equally valuable. Does that answer, Patty?
Yeah, it does. And it's really helpful because, you know, one of the things that we find now is, you know, companies are wanting to be on Canada's top 5, one of Canada's top 5 employers and all that kind of thing. And sometimes I think the simplicity of being a company that is family-based and operates that way and models that way is just as valuable. So yes, thanks very much for that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think there was so much more I wanted to say, but all the more reason to encourage all of you.
There's a question in the chat. There's a question waiting for you in the chat.
Okay.
Maybe the host wants to notice that one. Or shall I read it out to you?
Sure.
I realize Mott, it's a question from Kathleen Harvey. I realize Mott is now in Burnaby, but where specifically was the new west location?
Oh, okay. Well, they started down by the waterfront on, was it First Avenue or Fifth Avenue years and years ago. And then they moved to Royal Avenue, and they've only been in Burnaby just across the border since 2013. They bought a building in 2012, but they still are very well known in Westminster.
I'll jump.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just with a quick correction. We've been at the present location for about I think it's 11 years now, and prior to that, we were approximately 35 years on the corner of 14th Avenue and 20th Street in Burnaby. And prior to that, for many years, we were on the corner of Royal Avenue, where it intersects with starts to become Stewardson Way, which if any of you drive by there now, it's a porn retailer that was a business that we'd followed up with after we'd left, but no, it caused lots of for a long period of time. But and prior to that, there was offices downtown. They're somewhat noted in the book, but it was the early 70s. We went to 14th Avenue, and the prior 30 years we would have been down in the, as I said, on Royal Avenue, right down by the old Terminal Hotel, for those of you that may know that. So that's a bit of the geographical history. And just back to the earlier question, there's 3 gentlemen on the screen that I know quite well: Gordon Denham, Bruce McKay, and Doug Murray, all looking very relaxed in their living rooms. I'm not sure about that growth on your face there, Bruce, but they would be ones that could comment and, and to a degree, I'm sure, be brutally honest about the culture shifting a bit, trying to do your best. And as Elsie said, when you get bigger, the picnics aren't as intimate. We don't get out to every job site and know everybody's wife and every employee that works for us, which is, it's a bit of a sad reality, but we still try and do the best and stay in contact with as many people as possible. And I can assure you that those 3 gentlemen that are on the screen with their smiling faces carry that forward and are pretty much family the way they go to job sites and talk to people. So I'll leave them to make any comments should they wish.
And Doug Murray, you can probably answer the question around mentorship, because that's huge. That retains the sense of culture. Do you want to talk to that, Doug?
Sure, just trying to unmute here. Hello, everybody. I'm honored to take part in this today. I didn't think I was going to have to say anything, so thanks, Dan. Mentorship, yes, it's one of the most important things that we try to do at Mott Electric. It keeps the younger ones coming up in contact with the more seasoned Mott Electric employees, and the way it gets passed down from, you could say, generation to generation through Mott Electric is done a lot with mentorship. It's how I'm sure we've lasted this long and how we're going to continue, how things get passed along from worker to worker. It'll never end with mentorship. It's the way to the future.
Bruce, do you want to say anything? Bruce McKay, are you there?
Hi, Elsie. Am I right next to you on your screen as well?
I see you.
Yeah. I'd just like to say how nice it was working with you. I forgot that I was given information to a book. It was more or less I was just talking to a lovely middle-aged woman, tell her stories, and forgetting that it was all going to be written, putting the written word into a book. So it was a lot of fun, and there's just a million stories. It's, you captured a lot of it. It's really, really great. Everybody I've sent the book to or talked about it, you just end up having another conversation for hours and hours and reminiscing, and just, it's so nice to get it all written down, because when people get old and pass away, all the history just kind of disappears. So it's been fun for me just to talk to other people about it and reminisce.
Yeah, Bruce is a genius with numbers. Ask him for dates, and Bruce will give you the date and where he was working. I once asked him to recite the jobs he'd worked at, and he sent me a list of 60 dates, places, who was the foreman, what his position was. Just he just defies the old stereotype of people who go into trades that are perhaps lesser endowed academically. No such thing. All the electricians I met, intelligent, thoughtful, talented human beings. Just was such a privilege to meet all of them. Okay, should we carry on a little bit, Michelle? We've only got 10 minutes left. I wanted to read one of the things that struck me as the writer of this story was the role of intuition. Not only experience, intelligence, and education, but intuition played a really big role. when, as I already said, when Bruce Lewis was assigned the position or invited to become the superintendent and then ended up being the general manager of the company, there were a number of people waiting in the wings, assuming they would get that. But intuition plays a huge role in the company in how they select people. For example, Doug Murray, who just spoke prior to Bruce, doesn't know why he was selected to work in every single aspect, industrial, commercial, residential. But there was reason for that. I think Dan probably saw something in him, and over the years trained him, and now Doug is in the office overseeing he's the operations manager. So it's huge how they intuit. And so the story back to Kat Falk, who is from Manitoba and of Mennonite background like me. Kat worked at Mott when she was doing her apprenticeship, and she was out in the field. She was one of the few women who were electricians. And I just wanted to read you what some of what she told me, because there are more and more women going into the trades, and it's important to acknowledge them as well. So this is Kat. I don't think I ever worked with another woman as an electrician at Mott. There were very few women. I'm pretty good at drawing lines, so I didn't have too many problems. The system is pretty much set up to favor you, so if you decide to make a stand, you have backing. You're always watched by everyone, not just the foreman. They're definitely wanting to make sure you're pulling your weight, so that's always there. And if you're better or smarter than them, Kat laughs. I worked with Carlo, Bruce, Dave, and a guy named Andrew. We did a job out at Delta Port, some cranes out there. I wouldn't say I enjoyed that. It's either pouring rain, and if it's not, it's windy, and then it's whipping coal dust all over you from West Shore terminals next door. It was interesting, neat to work on a crane. You adapt very quickly to heights, maybe an hour or so, you're used to it. I actually told a foreman on a job that I quit on that gantry crane job. It was like, I quit, this is bullshit. He's like, no, you don't, you can't quit. It was pretty wicked. Then he said, I'll make someone else do that. And that's not fair. I should be doing this. I was working on a 1-foot cable tray, 50 feet in the air, underneath a crane, terminating all these cables. I broke a couple of axles. I tied strings on everything because it was you're not allowed to do that. Actually, cable trays are the human support, but that's what we had, and that's what I was doing. And I was breaking tools, and I was getting mad. It was just so cold and horrible, and then I just finished it. I had my hissy fit. Kat laughs. Most days are not bad days. That job was just nuts. It was just me, and it was a slab job and a foreman. And for the most part, I'd never done the work before. And he would just tell me what to do, and I'd just run all day long. And him and me, he also had a drinking problem. One day we had this incredible fight. He's standing here, I'm standing there face to face, and we're like, he was bigger than me, screaming at each other. The general contractor foreman, they can't handle stuff like that. If it was a guy, they wouldn't have cared, but they were just like, it's okay, it's okay. Yeah, that was pretty bad. Anyway, he apologized and we got over it. I have a line, don't cross it. In those days, it was like I'm doing some kind of anthropology degree or sociology because like, wow, this is a different world. I chose to not take offense at most stuff, to make sexism work for me. Fine, if you want to do my job for me, that's awesome, because then I'm getting my work done twice as fast. You can choose to be angry all the time or not. Trades are probably still frowned on a little, but you can make good money, and it's something you have wherever you go. You might have to recertify depending where, but it's skills that transfer. Oh, for sure, there's a connection between my education in interior design and electrical work. I've drawn the drawings, so reading blueprints and all of that was second nature, so it was a huge asset. I don't think any education is wasted. Well, Kat went traveling for a while after she'd done her apprenticeship, came back, worked for another company, and was invited to come back to Mott Electric. And today, when I interviewed her, she was the chief estimator, project manager, and I said, "How did that happen?" And this is where intuition comes in again. And there were other people in the office who might have slipped into the role of chief estimator, but it was Kat that was selected. Dan and Graham, who is the previous general manager, Dan and Graham said, "Come outside and let's sit at this picnic table." Then they asked me, "And what?" I fell over and Graham caught me. It was out of the blue. Jim Griffith was well at retirement age, and the thought had crossed my mind, but I wouldn't say I was aspiring to it. I was enjoying project management a lot more than estimating. Dan was surprised that I didn't answer immediately. It was a pretty big decision, took a few weeks. It was partly the dynamics of the changing role. Obviously, it's a big responsibility. They asked me in early July. The transition started in July, and Jim ended up leaving on New Year's Eve. Then it was game on. She laughs, holds up an inscribed object. I said this a lot, I'll tell you that much. I will be positive, patient, and persistent. And she's just a fabulous person and wonderful worker. So that's how it goes there. They'd obviously been watching her and saw something in her, and away she went. So it really, yeah, intuition is a big thing there, and watching their people and training them, and yeah. So any other questions? Oh, I should answer one question that popped up. Are there any other Motts in the lineup, essentially is what the question was. So I wanted to conclude by reading the words that were signed by Derek and Alicia Mott. They are the 4th generation of the company. And it was appropriate for them to have the last word in the book, which is called Afterword. And these are Alicia's words in the epigraph. Life is not linear or a ladder you climb. Rather, it resembles a constellation that lights the skies for future generations. So I'm just going to read a little portion of the afterword, and then we'll open it up to questions. And we'll remind you again where the book is available. Any organization that's existed over 9 decades will have experienced hardship. We have certainly had our share of harrowing jobs, distressed economies, and now even a global health crisis. Reading the stories here, and she's referring to the book, or they're referring to the book, we can feel the dedication and sheer moxie of the people in them. Their perseverance reinforces the baseline. Mott Electric is strong, not perfect or free of pain, but learning always from experiences and challenges. Perhaps it's our new Westminster underpinnings, the 9 lives of the Mott family, the grit of electricians, or the commitment to a common cause. Our hope is that this sentiment instills confidence in those who are still writing the story. We may feel strained at times, challenged by variables outside our control, but as long as we are united, we can lean on that baseline to survive 2020 and the highs and lows that will inevitably follow. Our core values appear throughout these memoirs, values that include moral fiber and integrity. And as our predecessors have taught us, some things take experience and time. There is no playbook for managing the big challenges. Success boils down to a balance of hunger, optimism, and humility, complemented by humor as needed. And humor is there in droves, let me tell you. These may be the final words in Mott Electric, Our People, Our Story, but this chronicle is far from over. Mott Electric's mission is to reach its 100-year milestone and far beyond. It is our personal and professional privilege to lead Mott Electric onward. With optimism and gratitude to all of you, those from the past who made this future possible, those who journey with us now, and those destined to join the Mott Electric family hereafter. Derek Mott and Alicia Mott. So yeah, that's the 4th generation. It's in good hands. Any other questions?
Elsie, did you see the question, approximately what year would it have been that Kat was recounting?
That would have been, I believe, in the 90s. Yeah. She did her apprenticeship in the mid 1996 to 97. And
Bruce
she
McKay
became-
would know.
Yeah, Bruce McKay worked with her and said she was a fine worker.
I knew I was going to get that question. I don't have the answer. I don't know that year. Probably.
She said 96 to 97 is when she
Yep.
did her apprenticeship with
Well,
Mott.
that was
So,
Deltaport,
yeah, Deltaport. Yeah.
like late, what, 97, 98 down?
Yeah, Graham would know that. I saw him on the screen a minute ago.
Oh, yeah. And I wanted to read a comment from Ron Howarth, I believe is on. I
Did you want
cannot.
me to talk to that?
Elsie?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Deb.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I finished Deltaport in 97. So that's when I moved into the office in 97.
Mhm.
So it was, we started out there late 95. We were there most of 96 and
Mhm.
all of 96 and part of 97.
Yeah, so it would have been during those years.
Mhm.
Yeah, some people were a bit rusty on their dates. It's you know, if you didn't keep a track or have a
You just
a
needed
memory
Bruce
like Bruce
everywhere. That's all
McKay's.
you needed.
You only needed Bruce. Yeah. I just want to read what members of the Howarth family said. I cannot say how happy to hear you speak about my father. It has been 57 years since we lost him, and I was at a young age, so the connections you have offered me are so precious to me now. I have not had any contact with anyone over these years until now. It has raised even higher my respect for my dad. I cannot tell you. Thank you all.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It doesn't look like anybody has any further questions, but I'm sure you can contact us at the museum. It's just museum@newwestcity.ca if you have any further questions that you'd like forwarded on to Elsie. And just a reminder that you can get the book from locally here in New Westminster from Renaissance Books, or in Chilliwack. You can make the trek out there if you're not local to there, at the Bookman. And I did include that information at the beginning, but I will include it again here in the chat. And also a reminder that we do have a pretty full schedule of free virtual programs. If you are interested in learning more about New Westminster history and heritage, we are happy to have you join us. And thank you again for taking some time out of your Saturday afternoon. Thank you to Elsie and Dan for offering your time and your stories, and all of our other surprise guest speakers who came out today. Elsie or Dan, do you want to say one last?
I just want to say that you can also get the book from me if you email me. I'm moving to Abbotsford next month, so I'm willing to sell copies out of the back of my car if anybody wants to meet me somewhere, some back alley in Abbotsford. So I just posted my email address here, so I hope it goes in. Is it going? Not sure. You can find me on Facebook too. So great. Thanks everyone so much for attending. Really appreciate it from right across Canada.
Thanks, Elsie.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this.